Welcome to this presentation, Exploring Cannabis as a Psychedelic. My name's Paul Benham. What we're going to learn today is a lot. So I hope you're ready, sitting comfortably to learn about the mental health issues that we face today in society, in our culture. How growing up with psychedelics changed my life. I want to give you some history on cannabis and actually what is a cannabis psychedelic experience. I assure you, you will learn things that you don't know about cannabis today. And I want you to understand how cannabis is the first legal psychedelic in Australia, at least the first legally, widely accessible psychedelic in Australia. I will talk a little bit about what can go wrong and how actually this is the first time we can actually advertise psychedelic experiences today in Australia. And we'll have some time for Q&A. So I will go to this in depth later on, but just want you to understand that when we're talking about cannabis psychedelic process, it's very similar to other psychedelic processes in terms of it being based on preparation, very important mindset and setting, very important to the actual experience itself, the grounding, integration, and yes, more integration ongoing. So we're going to go into that in more detail later on in this presentation. And I want you to understand that the kind of feedback we get on people who've had cannabis psychedelic experiences. This one is an example from Eva. My psychedelic journey provided me with such deep healing. I found I was able to shine the light on some of my shadows, to face my fears, to look at deep-seated traumas still in my body, and to become aware of some unconscious patterns that were playing out in my life. I walked away from the experience feeling empowered, strong, brave, lighter, and with a deeper sense of trust in myself, others, and life at large. This is just an example of one of many positive experiences people get from cannabis psychedelics. But why do we need this? Well, Australia is part of the worldwide mental health problem. Anxiety and depression affecting nearly 500 million people globally. That's 15% of the entire global population have a mental illness. That's pretty significant. And in the US, 33% nearly of all adults experience both mental health conditions and substance abuse. So this is no light subject and no small issue in our culture today. In Australia, it's even worse. 43% of the Australian population have experienced a mental disorder at some time in their life. And mental health being a key component of overall health and well-being, it's something that we need to deal with, and that's why we're here. Now, how mental health is measured based on science means, and in these stats is another question. I have seen and met many lost souls more recently, particularly as I get to promote psychedelics more widely now. And I'm not sure if they're all completely lost as they believe. I feel that they're actually just waking up and maybe feeling lonely, not yet knowing all the parts of themselves. And I want to find ways where we can empower such people to be strong within the society that we live in. My journey first began in London. I'm English originally, if you haven't yet known by the accent. And that's where I first smoked cannabis when I was about 14 years old. I was brought up in a society that said no drugs, but drugs are bad. And yet, it seems quite a few people, quite a high percentage of the population smoked cannabis at 14 years old. And that was obviously the change that affected me particularly for the rest of my life. It gave me a feeling of lightness. I remember laughing and just having the giggles and understanding what that meant for the first time from a substance that I could put in my body. That followed not long after, maybe a couple of years after, with my first LSD trip with friends. That certainly did change my life the second time, where I not only just saw things moving in hallucinations, but I realized that the world is far bigger than I had ever imagined and inside. So that continued in my life, where I moved throughout London, spending time with my friends in the forests, picking magic mushrooms, making them into cups of tea, And again, that become the subculture that I basically ended up growing up in. So it was very far removed from, I guess, how I'd been brought up. A fascinating space to be in. And in London, as you can see by some people pictured in this, MDMA, ecstasy, 2CB, all these other drugs were consumed quite widely. And what I noticed from them is that it brought people together. It was the culture of bringing people together with one vision. Doesn't matter where they came from. And, you know, most of them were young, of course, as I was at the time, going to these underground rave cultures. But it was a kind of a defiance. And it was my first defiance against the system, realizing that, you know, what I'd been told was wrong was actually brought people together in more joy and harmony, and that was a possible reality. So again, yeah, in that form, these kind of drugs really brought people together. So yeah, I left school at 16, 17, before I finished the equivalent of my HSC, where I was very egotistical, caring about my hair and how I looked all the time. And it was these kind of experiences, particularly with cannabis and LSD, that made me realize that it wasn't all about looks on the outside. It was more about how you feel on the inside. So I decided to head off to Thailand, where I really changed my life. I ended up going to a meditation center, doing 10-day Vipassana at the age of 17, and that again, with the drugs before and drugs after, particularly a lot of cannabis, mushrooms, LSD at this time, made me realize that it was, for me, it was all about enlightenment. How could I focus on enlightenment in this day and age, not just for myself, but for all beings? May all beings be well and be happy. And that led me to studying the indigenous cultures of Thailand, who I found absolutely fascinating. They actually led me to looking at community, where I lived with people who didn't speak a word of English, and that really helped me also learning that communication is not about words. Now, you know, psychedelics had already showed me that, and I felt really connected to these people as I think they did to me. In these cultures, I learned what they were doing, and I experienced things like opium for the first time, and I was living in cultures where these people had been consuming opium until their old age and had no problems whatsoever. So again, another lesson learned here with indigenous cultures, that if taken respectfully, any substance used in its natural habitat is not a problem, unless you need to stop taking it for some reason, which in the West, if it's illegal, that can be a serious problem. Ibogaine is one of the few things I haven't tried, by the way, yet, and it's really good for addiction. So I've been lucky to have a strong personality and not been addicted to anything. So Ibogaine is really beneficial, but again, for all the things that opiates bring in the world, both CBD and THC have been very, very powerful antagonists for that. So my travels took me through Tibet, India, months on months, in fact, so many countries, where I was fueled by cannabis and cannabis culture. And the more I studied and learned about cannabis and where it came from, the more fascinating I found it. I was studying psychedelics since I was 19 years old. This is a picture of me around 19, maybe even earlier. And I bought these books from London, took them to Asia, and that became a habit for a while. I grew up with people like Terence McKenna in Megatropolis, London nightclubs, hearing him speak all the time. And this was my university. So instead of going to university, I chose to read these kind of books and focus on my own wellness and how I wanted to expand in the world. And that spent a lot of time in the Himalayas doing that. I traveled down to Goa on a motorbike, 3 months travel trips, and that's where I had some other experiences of psychedelics. Again, being rocket fueled by cannabis, morning, noon and night. Sometimes I would wake up consuming 9 chilims before breakfast. If you know what that means. I certainly didn't microdose mushrooms at the time, and I had lots of these LSD tablets, which ultimately gave me some really bad trips along the way. including in Goa, on Koh Peng Yang in the beautiful paradise beaches. And that's when I learned that whether paradise doesn't exist externally, external objects are irrelevant. It's how you feel inside. And I learned that heaven and hell do exist both within ourselves, and we get to create that. It took me a long time to understand why these situations existed, but ultimately that's what's led to the strong protocols that I now follow, that actually science completely agrees with, which includes strong setting and preparation and integration. These events led me to continue smoking cannabis, which I did for many years. I traveled around all the ley lines and power sites of the UK, studying community in places like Machynlleth in northwest Wales, where I ended up focusing more on creating a community, and have wanted to do that before I even discovered cannabis and hemp. One of my travels took me to New Zealand to meet Maori people, which was great, except my girlfriend's schizophrenic mum, where I started to learn about mental health diseases. Discovered some LSD tablets, which she passed to her neighbour, who happened to be the chief of police. So these wonderful experiences certainly taught me about the law, about mental health issues, which I continued to study as I couldn't leave anywhere in New Zealand. Ultimately, I've travelled to Canada to meet a hippie called Dylan, who was an amazing guy who used cannabis for all these different uses, and ultimately introduced me to hemp as a food, which I found fascinating. Canada, by the way, where he is, currently has a $4.7 billion cannabis industry today. Australia, a $5 billion $0.5 billion industry. So it has 10 times the growth to go. Now Canada has a few more people than Australia, but not many. It's about 10% more. So yeah, as I said, Dylan introduced me to the omega-3 and omega-6 benefits of hemp seeds. Extremely healthy and good for you, and that has powered most of my career. And it's when I decided actually to at least not smoke publicly for a while, until eventually I didn't smoke at all for many years, or use cannabis, because I was dedicated to taking this wonderful herb. So I basically taught people that there was a very strong line between hemp and marijuana, even though it's the same plant, exactly the same plant. Hemp and marijuana are just two names. For that plant, hemp is usually talks about the high CBD, low THC varieties, and we're talking about THC predominantly, and marijuana being the high THC and low CBD. THC stands for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a molecule that generally gets you high. There are other cannabinoids within cannabis that do get you high, and other ingredients that affect the overall effects, and we'll talk about those shortly. But it is the cannabis plant, all the same, one and the same, and all the cannabis plants, whether marijuana or hemp, can grow to either produce seeds or flowers, or can actually be hermaphrodite and produce both. But they all have a stalk, which has a very strong, long fiber and a very woody core called a shiv inside. It all has leaves and roots too, and all have multiple uses, which is what I focused my career on, many of those uses. One of the first products I created was the 9 Bar, a health food bar in the UK, which I had no idea about business. I was super anti-establishment for most of my upbringing, until this time, and I just wanted to get hemp seeds and the nutritional benefits to as many people as possible, because I truly believe that it would help everybody's health, and that was important for me. It was my first mission. That mission became successful. I ended up selling, I think, over 300 million bars with that product over the years to come after launch. Part of my success allowed me to go and travel around festivals in the UK, where I not only consume cannabis, but I wore cannabis. That's 100% cannabis suit. I had cannabis painted on my face, cannabis t-shirt, hats. I sold cannabis ice creams, dairy, non-dairy, cannabis foods, cannabis soups, cannabis breads, cannabis books, playing Bob Marley from an ice cream van, which was decorated in cannabis leaves, driving around the UK, where I literally went from festival to festival, having queues of people where I educate on the differences between hemp and cannabis, and why It was actually really healthy for you. Very successful until I was headhunted to come to Australia. I thought it was an interesting opportunity. I'd been here before, so once before in my travels. And I like the idea of rainforest, ocean, and warmer weather. After 2 years of promoting hemp here, I found out that it wasn't going to be allowed as a food, and I already made a home here, having a child, and yeah, that became a long journey, which I'll mention very shortly. So instead of that, I continued with what else was what I was interested in, which was making bioplastics from cannabis. So this is a mixture of cannabis and other bioplastics or plastics. And High Fly, I think I was the first person to produce a hemp plastic since Henry Ford, and still promote that very widely today. That progressed to making 100% hemp products, like the Digis, chairs, speakers, and now the hemp plastic company looks to making trainloads of this for many multinationals all over the world. So while hemp wasn't legal, I ended up writing books. I ended up writing quite a lot of books, actually. I think I wrote 10 books. During that time, I'd written one already, so 9 more in the UK, which was published in London. The rest became self-published as I learned the difference about publishing. And 6 more recently, all on cannabis, psychedelics, and the specific things. Until finally, after 17
pot
years,
of gold.
cannabis and hemp was
Lauren Day,
legal,
10 Eyewitness News.
which is very exciting. And and that mainly produce these products that you may have seen on the shelves, supermarkets, health food stores, etc. Also produce skincare made from cannabis, again feeding the skin with the benefits, certified organic skincare range, until created Elixinol, the first CBD company in Australia, to use hemp, and no one else had produced it here, and I decided to take that to the US and Europe. And that's when in the US, our team at the very beginning started our work by coming together under plant medicine ceremonies, such as using wachuma in this, and that really brought our main team together and was part of the culture. Cannabis was part of the culture, but not really in a big way, because we had so much to do, and cannabis is great for creativity, but I'm not sure so much for when you're growing a business from very small to very big. Within a few years, I listed that company and Hemp Foods on the ASX, and that became worth $100 million at listing, which I ended up growing to $600 million market cap company, 160 employees, turning over $60 million plus. So that was definitely an experience of business on all levels. So everything from being anti-business at the beginning, creating snack bars, creating bioplastics, all the way to this kind of level was definitely interesting. It took me to meet, the First Lady of Japan, advertising on the tube stations, having a crowd of many thousands of people looking at me on the stage in Tokyo. The Times Square advertising, I think we're the first CBD company to ever advertise in Times Square. All these exciting events were all part of my role in working with cannabis, including looking after our feline friends with 4-leggeds. I got to fly high, visiting over 47 countries for business, and sometimes I did try psychedelic experiences in first class on some of those journeys. because I owned a lab basically in the US that produced all these different cannabinoids. So I tried all of them, and the most time I had was when I was on planes, because I was on planes a lot. So that was definitely interesting experiences. Don't really recommend experimenting with psychedelics on a plane where you can't walk out in nature. Just thought you might find it interesting. I continue to work with cannabis today in different products, including using the cannaverin group of materials coming from the cannabis plant, producing weight loss supplements and things like that. As much as working with DMT, 5-MeO, DMT, and all these other materials, more recently plant-based materials or products or synthetics, to guide me on my journey when I feel like I've needed some direction. Generally, the person or the spirit that has led me has been cannabis. It's been my friend, my boss along this journey. And it's been humanity's friend on this journey of humanity also, because it has been Earth's most important commodity for thousands of years, and it will be moving forward as well. It is only really about, as you can see here, 85 years of being the most persecuted commodity in the world. So it's a fantastic crop that has a history from 4,000 years ago in the Egyptian tombs. There's been pictures of cannabis leaves and understandings of it was related in the hieroglyphics, showing it was used for both fibers and medicine. And of course, the British sail ships, which were in the British Empire, which is a big part of our global history, or at least it is if you're English. These big ships where England went around the world, colonizing the world, used 80 tons of hemp per ship that needed to be replaced every 3 to 4 years. That required about 320 acres of hemp. And Britain basically didn't have enough hemp. We were, small amounts of land, so had to go elsewhere. Sir Joseph Banks is a British botanist, and this amazing book really explains that history, that in 1788, 11 convict ships came to Australia with hemp seeds to grow hemp for the British ships. So Australia is very much connected with or modern Australia is connected with the cannabis story, or the use of cannabis and hemp around the world. But it's not just Egypt and England, it's India, which has Shivaism. Shiva is the god of cannabis, and spent a lot of time in North India with the sadhus who use cannabis as their daily medicine and prayer tool. It's also mentioned in the 3,000-year-old Vedas. We mentioned the Egyptians before as well. It's actually 1550 BC. It was talked about as a medicine. The Chinese, the Emperor Shen Nung had it in the pharmacopoeia many thousands of years ago. But it was the Romans that had the most interesting use and the closest to cannabis psychedelics, where they used cannabis in enclosed rooms where they used to burn it, and people used to howl for joy after inhaling the fumes. So that is very much the equivalent of vaporizing cannabis. It's like going in a sweat lodge with cannabis instead of heat and moisture. And that was a very strong way to get high. But anyway, the stigma of cannabis has been with us, is still with us, whether we like it or not. Things are changing, absolutely, but it is the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, the war on drugs that happened, that called cannabis the gateway drug theory, which is not supported by any research whatsoever, but did affect research and made sure that in the US, particularly as a Schedule 1 drug, it was virtually impossible to study cannabis for anybody, so most people stayed away from it. And there was no reason to it, being a Schedule 1 drug. But the attitudes are shifting around the world.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case. In this startling film, you will see dopesters lure children to destruction.
We're going over to Joe's place. Why don't you come along? We have a date to play a set of doubles. Oh, you can play anytime. Come on, we'll have some laughs.
Can I go along with you?
Sure.
Hey, I'll see you at dinner, Sid. If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
Anyway,
You will meet Bill.
that's a great video. Ever since. The legislation is changing for cannabis. In 1976, the Netherlands was one of the first countries to decriminalize cannabis. Yes, it's still not legal in Amsterdam. You wouldn't believe that. We're seeing it everywhere. And Colorado followed suit in about 2012, which was a fascinating time to be around Colorado, which started my interest in that particular state of the US. I still love it. It's one of my favorite homes in the world. And Australia followed suit not too long after, actually, in 2016, to use cannabis for medical and scientific purposes, which is a really exciting growth. And again, a bit like psychedelics today, Australia didn't really know what to do with it at the beginning, and is just learning really now, I would say. And that can, by you listening to this, you're being part of that solution. So Thailand decriminalized the sale of marijuana in 2022. You may have heard of that. Yes, there's changes happening at the moment. And Germany has just allowed recreational cannabis to be allowed from in about a week's time. Law says that, as I said, cannabis was legalized for medical uses in Australia in 2016. It wasn't until 2017 that cannabis was legalized as a food. Yeah, that took me 17 years to change. And now that's why I was focused on food at the time, because that has been my whole career until then. So I didn't really focus in the cannabis or THC movement until after I built the food company up and moved away from that only a few years ago. There's even recreational bills moving through the Senate right now today in Australia, which started last year and moving to this year. This is 2024, and we'll see where they go. Ketamine, it should be worth noting, which is I would suggest is another psychedelic that is was able to be used for treatment-resistant depression from 5th of March. Of 2021, so a few years later. For that, a drug was created by Johnson & Johnson called Spravato, which was basically just S-ketamine, one molecule away from basic ketamine. They did that just to patent the material. And then psilocybin and MDMA, as I'm sure you're all aware, was allowed from the 1st of July 2023. So let's talk about what is cannabis specifically. Sativa, indica, ruderolus are the three types of plants. And then we've got the THC and CBD focus, but there's hundreds of compounds, as we'll go into shortly. And I prefer to talk about it as broadleaf and narrowleaf dominant plants, because there is no such thing as pure cannabis sativa, pure cannabis indica. So no one has an indica or sativa plant. It's indica dominant or sativa dominant predominantly. Plants that it's like a gray spectrum. There's no black and white. There's everything in between, though, in terms of...
Let's talk about marijuana and your brain. It's a rather complicated process, so let's start off with what's familiar to you. THC. THC is the chemical in weed that gets you high. You feel lightheaded. Feel giddy. Sometimes relaxed. Marijuana, you can smoke it. You can eat it in an extract of food. You can inhale it with a vapor pen, or consume it in an oil form. It's especially good for little kids who are taking it as a medicine. No matter the method, THC goes.
So that's all about THC. It's good for kids, according to CNN, which is wonderful in THC and CBD products. It is important to know how it works, and cannabis does work predominantly on the receptors CB1 and CB2, which are two main receptors within the endocannabinoid system. What is the endocannabinoid system? It is a complex network of organs throughout the body. Predominantly in the brain, but also in organs such as liver, heart, but also throughout the nervous system as well. Cannabis receptors play a homeostatic role, so that means it brings us into balance and can work on different systems and is connected to pain, memory, movement, appetite, metabolism, and many other things. And this endocannabinoid system is something we've only discovered relatively recently and hasn't been taught to doctors or scientists or physicians for most of what people even who qualified today haven't been taught that, basically. So it's really fascinating. There is still a lot of more research to know how it works, where it works, and how and what it does, but it definitely has a lot of important roles within the body. Cannabinoids also work by regulating some of the serotonergic functions, which is part of the reason why it is considered a true psychedelic, because it does affect and able to change the signals of the serotonin 2A receptors, particularly 5-HT2-1 and 5-HT2AR, which, and there's a lot of research which we won't go into today, but the neurology and the workings of cannabis are very fascinating. Let's stay high level today and talk more about what is medical cannabis defined as. There is cannabis, marijuana, hemp, medical cannabis, recreation. What's the difference between all of these things? Well, I just want to be clear, they're all cannabis sativa. There is no difference in that regards. Nothing is not cannabis in this list here. Cannabis usually is defined, as I said, between marijuana and hemp, and there's many other different names that can be used because they're all names that have been made up relatively recently. Marijuana defines the high THC, hemp the low THC. Medical cannabis is something that's been offered by a physician to a client for a specific medical use. Recreational cannabis is usually something that has been used illegally in most places in the world, or where it's legal without a medical use. In Colorado, I found it really fascinating to go to the dispensaries where you'd go into a shop. On one side there'd be medical cannabis, on the other side there'll be recreational cannabis. And I kept looking and going, excuse me, what's the difference? Because they had exactly the same products, both sides. And they said, it's medical and recreational. I was like, yeah, but why is medical side and recreational? Well, medical is cheaper. I was like, great, I'll buy medical. It's like, well, you have to go and get a card from your doctor. So basically, you go and get a card from your doctor, so it goes throughout the system. People get paid to give you your prescription. It supports the doctors and etc. to go and get the same medical products as you would recreational products. So it's kind of a farce, because from my perspective, if you take anything recreationally, whether it's cannabis or alcohol or any other drug, generally I would say you're taking it for your own medical, you're just self-medicating. So when people say medical cannabis, it's talking about a qualified person giving you a prescription for that particular product. So again, cannabis, like anything else, don't get me wrong, can be abused. And that's what most people think as marijuana, recreational cannabis, abuse. They generally put those three things together. They're all quite separate. You can have marijuana and recreationally and not abusing that. And you can be really looking after yourself. Some people use it to chill out in the afternoon and the evening and to hang out and talk with their friends. Some people use it every day and rely on it and abuse it in that form. So these are the different ways it works. So when people are taking it, maybe they don't realize they're using it as a vasorelaxant. Maybe they don't realize they're using it as an anti-inflammatory, an anti-spasmodic, an anti-diabetic, and for, who knows why they're using it, because it works on so many different things. It's the same concept as when I started with hemp foods. I suggested when people take hemp foods, their brain would already know how good it is for their body and tell them to keep eating hemp foods, and that really worked for my first snack bar. I believe cannabis is similar. If people use it, they may find it actually has some benefits in a way that they didn't know, because they didn't even know what the word anti-ischemic means. So it could be really helpful for many people. But it is a complex plant. It has over 400 different chemicals in. It is used generally as a whole plant extract, but people now, as it gets more into commercial capitalist society, people are extracting specific cannabinoids, specific terpenes. Sadly today, one of the most common things when people go to a dispensary where they can legally purchase it in somewhere like America, the most common question is, what's the highest THC product you have? I want to buy that one. Which is really sad to hear, because that really doesn't make any difference at all. In fact, you can have something that is, say, 25% THC and something that's, say, 15% THC, and the 15% THC product can get you more high or more stoned, depending on what it actually is, because it's not just about the THC content. It's absolutely incorporates all the other cannabinoids, the other terpenes and flavonoids within that product. And that is what is known as the entourage effect. It is the synergistic interaction between these many compounds in cannabis that is believed to have these and enhance these therapeutic effects that do exist in any form. Terpenes particularly are very important for me, and there's a number of terpenes. Terpenes are in everything. It's what make everything smell. So essential oils are basically a mix of terpenes. And these terpenes are like, for example, the predominant terpene in mango is myrcene. The predominant terpene in lemons are limonene. And depending on the terpene profile, will make it either a broad or narrow leaf dominant. You know that as a sativa or an indica leaf dominant material, and affects the quality or quite a lot. So we use terpenes directly within cannabis psychedelics, not only within the flower material itself, but also using nanotechnology to put it into the air. So we're using these pure nature-based compounds, which you can absorb not through just through your nasal passages and your lungs, but through your skin, which is your body's largest organ. So all different types of cannabis. What are they? Well, there's flowers, oils, hash, resins, edibles, topicals. Again, this is probably not where I'm going to go deep into all of these different types of cannabis and how they're used. I will say that what we promote, cannabis psychedelics, is preferable to people to use flowers predominantly. though live resins are even awesome if you can understand what good live resins are and how to use them. Hash also can be pretty good. Oils and other edibles also can be good, but again for different, maybe at night time, because they last a lot longer. So flowers generally for medical reasons, if you want it or for a specific purpose at a particular time, you want immediate effect, then you would use a vaporizer. In the middle is a vaporizer that was created before, I think it was the first vaporizer type ever in the world. And I learned this in Amsterdam from some friends there, and homemade one myself. It's basically a heat gun. And that's ultimately what the Germans engineered to become the Volcano on the left. They're probably the world's best vaporizer today. But also you don't need a high technology. You can use what the Saudis use, a piece of clay, and smoke from that also. So there's lots of different ways to imbibe or consume these products and to get the effects within them. When you consume it internally though, you probably should know that Delta 9 gets converted to Delta 11 THC. So it is literally a very different pathway, which is also affected by a person's metabolism. So it's really hard to gauge exactly what the effects are going to be when you're using edibles. And you're not really getting Delta 9 in that. When you have flowers, you really are getting Delta 9. When you put it in a really great vape, you're getting all the other entourage effects, which are the terpenes, etc. too. And when we talk about smoking, I do not promote smoking in any way, but I think it's quite interesting to know that there are actually studies saying that marijuana smoking has protective effects on the lungs. Again, I am not promoting the use of smoking. Vaporizing is not smoking, especially when done with good vaporizers. Bad vaporizers are called vaporizers, but they actually make the product smoke. And Australia's even banned vaporizers from March 2024. In fact, so no one can import them from this time. So if you can buy vaporizers now, it's a great time because there are people allowed to sell their stock for now, which is really quite sad because they can be quite helpful and better than smoking it in a joint. But definitely having cannabis without tobacco is very important. If you mix cannabis with tobacco, then of course it's not going to have the protective effects on the lungs, this medical professor has suggested. And while we're on safety, let's talk about poisonings. There's some interesting stats here about people, or what the most fatal poisonings are in the world. Most people are poisoned in terms of drugs by anxiety and depression drugs because I guess they're so commonly there. Over-the-counter painkillers are next. And then it goes all the way down to the least one, which is synthetic cannabinoids, which again are quite dangerous, and nothing like plant-based cannabinoids, which aren't of course anywhere on there, because which I'll explain in a second. But if you listen to the Australian Medical Association, real cannabis is not safe. Australians need synthetic chemicals. This was a quote from the president of the AMA. I'm sure he'll take that back most likely if he was asked today. But it just shows you where our medical association is at. They still have a lot to learn and catch up on, and understandably there's a lot to learn in medicine. So again, to summarize, cannabis has a lot of possible benefits with pain relief, anxiety, improving sleep, has neuroprotective effects and reduces nausea for cancer patients. So these are just some. There's a whole list of them here of different medical cannabis uses, and you can ask me for this a list later on if you're interested. I wanted to actually give you a little bit of more background of what I've done. In 2021, I set up a company called Delica. I founded this company to bring mindful solutions to improve lives through the use of psilocybin and psychedelic therapy. So I actually went through the process of creating a protocol for psilocybin, and that was 50% of the business. The other 50% was in biosynthetic manufacturing of psilocybin to supply it in Australia. And I thought it would be a helpful thing to do, to use all my experience with cannabis and growing companies to bring a team together. And I brought an amazing team together. One of my non-executive directors was 37 years at Johnson & Johnson and as managing director, is still a good friend to this day. I created a medical advisory board headed by Chairman David Hoff, who is the only person to ever legalize a psychedelic. and work with wonderful people like James Rucker from the Imperial College London, and many others I made friends with on this board. So I just wanted to let you know that's partly how I got involved with psychedelics and in a professional way. But ultimately, do I enjoy working in the corporate world? No, I do not. I find it a tool to get mainstream products out into the world. I think business is very powerful. How we affect people is very powerful in terms of what we offer, how we communicate, the tools that we use. The tools in business have been developed very successfully and created a thing called capitalism, which I may or may not agree with, but I'm sure we will all believe that and agree that it is everywhere around us. So this has led me, my career in cannabis, a few years in psychedelics, plus my experience as a younger child, led me to creating Cannabis Psychedelic. So before we go into the depths of what Cannabis Psychedelics is, what is a psychedelic? Now, you might think you know this, and please bear with me, I won't be long. But I'm in English, so I start at the English Oxford Dictionary, which just says drugs that induce changes in level of consciousness of the mind. Then we look at PubMed, powerful psychoactive substances. Robin Carhart Harris has a great description, this is just a short version of it, which is those that have appreciable serotonin 2A receptor agonist properties, which cannabis also does. There is a list on PubMed of, there's even a psychedelic effects of cannabis review of the literature paper on PubMed that was published only last year, which says that, of course, high THC cannabis may be able to elicit these psychedelic effects. I would go a bit further than saying maybe, and we'll talk about my belief in science and understanding. As you can see, I've worked with science. I did many studies working in the CBD field in the US, having literally put in over $180 million into that business, which included looking at the science-based evidence for everything that we did. And when I got involved with psilocybin through Delica, also the same, and we continue today to work with universities and science models. But I don't believe that science is know-all and that's the only way to prove things, and we'll come back to that if we have time. So again, my definition of psychedelics are psychoactive substances generally produce changes in perception, mood and mental processes, etc., generally with high doses in ceremony settings. Psychedelic, the word comes from the psych, and delic from manifestation, that's where Delica came from, so manifestating company, and mind manifesting is what psychedelics do. So what are the potential benefits of medicinal cannabis? Well, depression relief, addiction treatment, anxiety reduction, PTSD healing, spiritual growth and personal insights, all are possible through the use of cannabis. Now, I'm not making any claims about any of those things, but I am saying they are possible and are all listed in scientific literature. And as I said earlier, I'm not just following the scientific literature. In my career, I've focused on wellness, and that's how I survive through these, I guess, growth spurts within businesses and having to travel all around the world. It's by incorporating wellness within my life. So I'm looking at using wellness as the foundation for everything. Cannabis is the medicine, and psychedelic protocols are the basis to everything within the cannabis psychedelic offering. So we are talking everything from mindfulness, breath work, what we eat, how we think, on all different levels, and a lot more. I mentioned this earlier, the basic psychedelic process is the same: preparation, setting, experience, grounding, integration, more integration. So let's start with that. Let's start with the first part, which is the first impressions, which is the beginning of the set. The mindset is created when someone first hears about cannabis psychedelics. So if you're going to have a cannabis psychedelic experience from anywhere here on in, your mindset is being affected by what I'm sharing with you today, which is why I've put time into a great website, lots of questions, lots of emails and videos to share with people to give them a positive first impression of what the psychedelic experience will be. And a lot of that is around safety. The next part of the process is the medical intake forms, which has been designed by and supported by doctors who have helped me get enough information, doctors and psychotherapists, to get enough information to get a general mental and worldview picture of the client, as well as any potential contraindications to what they're doing, whether it's a lifestyle or products or drugs that they're taking, for the process ahead. And what are those contraindications? Because cannabis is safe. Cannabis is safer than water, in fact. And I've written a great blog post there. You can read that on the website, cannabispsychedelics.com.au. So are there any contraindications? Not many. According to a clinical pharmacist I've interviewed recently. Again, the information on that is on a video and a blog post. But pregnancy is one of those. I'm choosing not to treat people with pregnancy. I am suggesting people take hemp seeds when on pregnancy because the omega-3 content in brain development is particularly important in the second trimester. But taking high THC mind-altering substances is unknown with pregnancies, and there haven't been studies. Not an easy thing to study, so simply I stay away. Also, I stay away generally from dealing with people under the age of 21. Now, that is a generalization. There are some times when it may be appropriate to work with people under 21 when, for example, they're abusing cannabis and want to have a new respectful relationship with cannabis. Then maybe I will support them then, as long as there's no other contraindications. But if they're 21 and looking, or under 21 and looking for a psychedelic experience, then I'm probably not going to offer cannabis because it does affect the brain, which is still in development at that age. Bipolar is a complicated issue, and not being a psychiatrist or a qualified psychotherapist, it's not something I will generally support unless their therapist or psychiatrist recommends that this is appropriate for them. Similar with cardiovascular disease, a complicated disease, not worth the risk, so I'll generally stay away from that because cannabis does increase the heart rate and does affect blood pressure in a small way. And being very safe still, it's generally okay, but I will generally stay away from those kind of things. And I say generally because that's the discernment, and all facilitators are taught to make a discernment, always erring on the side of safety. So moving on from once we've got past the medical intake and we've decided that someone is good for a cannabis psychedelic experience, I'll have an initial interview, and that's when I have a real life conversation. I really get to know the person, see who they are, see where they're at in terms of themselves and this experience, and just really make sure that they've been honest within that medical intake form, and see if I can hear and feel behind the questions. It's a very important time to have an initial interview before the experience, not on the experience day. This is before the experience and after the medical intake has been assessed. And if all goes well, we get to the experience day where the mindset is strong, the person is very clear, they've set intentions, I've given them guidance on creating intentions. We have a great process to help and support people for that. There's even books on that we supply, so depending on how much support that they need to actually get their goal really clarified on the day itself. So again, these are all things that you would do in regular psychedelic therapy, but the reason we're having to communicate this, I guess, in a more public fashion, because the only time it's ever legally been communicated before is in a clinical study and clinical trial fashion. And that, in my personal opinion, is not real life. It is a clinical trial. It's in a hospital place. So we're dealing with real life people in real life settings. And a lot more people will be doing this, we believe, than clinical studies. So very soon, so it's important that we are supporting them in their mindset, in their positivity. A little bit of anxiousness is normal when going through into a psychedelic experience, and I kind of find it weird when people say that they have no anxiousness whatsoever. And I don't think I've had that maybe once ever. But it is an important thing to consider. The actual setting of the space on the day is also very important. What does a place look like? Is it clean? Does it have pictures of Buddha on that to show the serene meditation? No, it should not have a picture of Buddha on there, because maybe the client has a worldview that doesn't support Buddha. Maybe you didn't talk about that. So it doesn't matter whether you have your idea of sacred settings and looking at mainstream people is quite different in the real world. Again, when you're teaching your friends or helping your friends in a ceremonial setting, maybe that works. I'm not an indigenous person to Australia or anywhere else really, so I'm indigenous to the world, so I have to take a world view, which means staying with nature, focus, and pastel colors and safe settings. So then we go into the day, and the day consists of rituals. Rituals are very important in terms of the experience, and those rituals again are non-denominational, and they need to work depending on wherever the person comes from, and they usually focus on the different directions. So that's and what they stand for. I won't go into that again too much in detail today. I will share that I will support the clients with mindfulness practices before, and actually lead them through some meditations to relax them into the experience. And should they require more support, maybe breath work might be incorporated too. What I do use in cannabis psychedelics, which I partly is because of my background and my experience, is technodelics. So I very much support the use of technology in harmony with nature. Now, that may not work for some people, but for me it does. There are ways where we can amplify things like frequency, resonance. These things for me that I've learned through my psychedelic experiences exist throughout the world, connect us all. So those things like frequency can be put throughout a sound bed. I have a few of these here in Australia. I also sell them because my friend developed them. Very lucky to have great friends. Where they have 400 watt transducers and putting different signals throughout the body, which really can amplify an experience. I also use light frequency and sometimes transcranial direct current stimulation machines. So again, we're not here to talk about those in detail. You can find some information about that on my website and also some books on that subject. But they all help support a very focused direction, because ultimately it is a sound journey that people are going through to meet the spirit of the cannabis plant. I'm here to lead them to gently connect with that spirit, and I can turn that up and down using some technodelics. And I say turn it up and down, I can actually turn it off, and that is one of the major differences between cannabis and other psychedelics. It's one of the few psychedelic experiences where if you choose, you can leave the psychedelic experience. Maybe not completely come down and come off the being high part of it, but you can certainly come down off the psychedelic experiences. You would usually have a mask on. We've developed these masks, which I have available also, but you can take those off. You can sit up. We can ground them with foods and drinks, particular essential oils, smells, aromatherapy, and even some tinctures that are known to actually reduce the psychedelic experiences. But ultimately the day is around the medicine, which, again, may be pictures or molecules behind this, but it is an entourage of many hundreds of chemicals, hundreds of chemicals that have a spirit and very much a gentleness around it, and that's cannabis. So what does it feel like? These are some particular quotes from people who've had cannabis psychedelic experiences. It came on as strong as ayahuasca. I had visuals very similar to DMT. I gained deep insights through old memories and has changed my life forever. These are real, different things that have been communicated from me with people who have had ayahuasca, had DMT, and had these kind of experiences. Now, I'm not saying this is for everyone. This is not going to happen for everyone, but everyone seems to have visuals. Everyone seems to go into memories and have really deep experiences with the use of cannabis psychedelics. So, I hope you get to experience something like that, which all leads to, of course, needing some grounding. And grounding, after I mentioned earlier on, is done through a number of different methods. Journaling is the beginning of the integration, and I lead people straight from the cannabis psychedelic experience directly into the journaling side of things, where they start writing down their experiences, their feelings, whether it's pictures, feelings, actual memories, and I leave them to that. They're instructed to how to do that before the experience and have guides of words to support them after as well. And that continues and continues. because integration is critical. As we all know, it is where the actual work has to happen if we want to change in ourselves and bring those wonderful otherworldly plant spirit experiences into our daily practice. So that integration is supported to continue throughout that person's life, but certainly for the first few days. We have very, very clear directions, and that can continue and be passed on to their psychotherapist should they have ongoing support in that way, which is not often needed for a lot of people I've treated so far. But let's talk about what can go wrong, because anything that go wrong will go wrong. Murphy's Law. So, again, having a public psychedelic experience that I'm promoting, had to put a lot of time into this. So not only from the legal side, where I've had barristers and lawyers and look at this with me, but also from a number of psychotherapists, psychiatrists, doctors, professors, pharmacists, all have supported me in creating a strong ethical and integral background. Now, thankfully, a lot of the psychedelic institutes around the world have put a lot of time and effort into this, and I have piggybacked off their wonderful work, and much appreciation to them all. And I do recognize that as we probably bring psychedelics into the mainstream, that humanity continues. And there have been some reports in the media recently of what that looks like. So for anyone who goes through our facilitator training course to become a cannabis psychedelic facilitator, they agree to certain precepts, which includes, for example, no sexual relations with people that they work with for a very long period of time, and many other things as well. So it's very, very critical, because safety is first, and it's everybody's job. So, we want to empower our client to look after their own safety, but certainly when on medicine, it's 100% our responsibility to look after safety and what that looks like. Many discussions I'm sure we could have around that. Again, another day, another presentation, possibly. But back to safety. Let's focus on this. There are no deaths from cannabis use anywhere. You cannot find them. That's from a professor of Harvard. Now, that is a serious statement. How many substances can you say there is no death from water anywhere, for example? You can find them. So you can't overdose on cannabis. It is a safe substance from a physiological level. So we really are putting all our efforts into the psychological level, which we also need to be treated safely too. Cannabis is the single most versatile herbal remedy and the most useful plant on earth. I truly believe it is. Dr. Russo is talking about its medical benefits and all the different constituents we've talked about, but I also create hemp plastics, hemp foods, there's hemp textiles, hemp buildings, all from this one amazing plant that is brought to us and has been used for us from history, that our bodies are literally built from this plant. There is nothing like it. It is absolutely phenomenal. So let's summarize the cannabis psychedelic experience. It brings about an altered perception, an altered sense of time, enhance your creativity, euphoria, relaxation, and potentially spiritual experiences come from it. It's something we believe that is of interest to many people. So you heard this testimonial. Let's have one more from a psychotherapist interested in the healing potentials of psychoactive plants, and her experience was it was extremely insightful, and not as harsh on her nervous system or physical body as other psychedelics. She had some preconceived ideas about cannabis being stoned, but there was nothing like that. It was clear and vibrant with visuals that guided her through her intentions, that she had agency in to move in or out of those. And she believes it is something that is more accessible to the mainstream. So these are examples of really important testimonials for the world. I kind of want to finish up on this subject. It is the business of psychedelics. It is something that is really big for me. I've grown up respecting these things and not respecting these things. So I grew up kind of anti-government, anti-establishmentarianism kind of world. I grew up interested in academia, hated academia, went back and respected academia. Now I realize that academia, government, professionals like doctors, psychiatrists, now I've met these people at the top of some of their fields in academia and government and doctors, etc., I realize that all these people are human, just like you and I are. And they're all doing their best in the kind of lanes that they're hold. What is an important skill to have, I believe, is bringing these things together, taking the best from each of these things, learning from each of these different fields, and including the underground. That means, the people like you and I who may have offered these kind of things before they were made illegal, but now cannabis psychedelics is a legal therapy that can be offered to people and we can be promoted. So how do we navigate probably the most evil of all of these things? Is it academia? Is it government? Is it professional world? Is it the underground world? No, I believe it's capitalism. I believe capitalism, which, just to be clear, I've been part of, as you heard me speak earlier. I have no problems making hundreds of millions of dollars. I drive a nice car, live in a nice house. It's all wonderful. But do I believe it's great? No, I think it is actually a virus that has hurt our planet and made it very challenging for us to make things all equal. So how do we work in a business capitalistic society with something like psychedelics, which is kind of bringing our attention to the connectedness of everything? Because if capitalism was connected and equal and fair, then there wouldn't be such a strong hierarchy where there's absolutely winners, and where there's winners there absolutely is losers. So it's a big subject that I would really love to discuss in another presentation. And if you want to have a chat with me, please get in touch, and we can talk about that. But I truly believe this is the opportunity we have been waiting for, the opportunity to bring about the spirit world, to bring about visionaries, to bring about intuitives, to bring about sensitive people and connect them with the world of mainstream people, to give people an opportunity to wake up. So together, that bottom row of people in that capitalistic picture can all wake up and choose to whatever they may choose to do. So whether that's topple the capitalistic system, but to be more, I think what's more important is to recognize that we're more than all of these things. We're more than a head of a university. We're more than a minister in a government. We're more than a psychiatrist. We're more than just a healer. We are all of the things and aspects that we see within humanity. Because cannabis, I believe, truly is the breaking down the wall part of this solution. And it's what's led me here today. I have literally spent my entire life working with this plant, and I feel very humbly in its servancy, and I'm here to help you to make the change. So I did want to bring up a bit about technology more. As I mentioned earlier, I don't mind technology, and I think artificial intelligence, again, a whole presentation I could run around artificial intelligence. But I do want you to know that I'm not fully pro or fully against artificial intelligence. I think we can't stop it. One, it already exists. Two, it can, like anything, like cannabis, like drugs of any form, it can be used for good or bad. Okay, I believe that it has the potential to grow into a consciousness model, which can be really scary. I think there is apparently, according to interviews with people who are experts in their field, maybe a 20% chance that these kind of models can actually wipe out humanity. So yes, there is very serious things to look at around it. And meanwhile, while they are accessible, I've trained up a psychedelic AI model to support people in psychedelic psychotherapy, empathy, and to learn and to have some basic understanding of consciousness. I am not saying that AI is conscious. I don't believe it is in any form today, but I think it is starting to learn in that way. So I've fed it a whole bunch of books that I've learned from, and books that my psychotherapists, psychiatrists, healers, and other people have suggested it learn, and you can have an access to that for free, again, via the Cannabis Psychedelics website today. So again, if you're interested in this, you want to advertise cannabis psychedelic therapy, if you want to offer the first legal psychedelic therapy in Australia that's widely accessible, then you can do that today. You could have done that years ago, actually. And I wish people had done that, but because no one had, I felt the need and have spent years now in developing a course curriculum with a bunch of my friends, 24 of them, in fact, some wonderful people who are speakers here, doctors, professors, experts in their field, psychotherapists, cannabis experts from America, Europe, and Mongolia, and many other places. So 24 different experts who've really supported wellness people to give an overall wonderful feeling of support for people who want to offer and be qualified in cannabis psychedelic facilitators. So let's do this together. If you want to be part of this, please come and see me. Let's have a chat. I do not know everything about this. I do not pretend to be the best person to know about all of these things, but I'm doing my best, and I can only do that by working together, because I believe we truly do grow together in community. Thank you very much for listening today. I'm happy to take questions. If you're not listening to this live, then please go to my website and contact me via there, cannabispsychedelics.com.au. That's /join us if you can't read that. Thanks again, and have a great day.